All right, we should be live here. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. This is the Tezos Q3 2022 Analyst call. I know it's a little late, but better late than never. Today we're going to be talking about all things Tezos. First, before we get into it, let's do some introductions. My name is Nick Garcia. I'm an analyst with Messari, and I specialize on base layer protocols. Arthur, can you give a brief
Hi,
introduction?
my name is Arthur Breitman. I'm a co-founder of Tezos and early architect of the protocol.
Fantastic. So let me share my screen here so we can look at the report. So again, this is the Tezos Q3 2022 Analyst call. We're going to be talking about all things Tezos. Arthur, could you please provide a high-level overview of what is Tezos, what makes it unique, and how does it compare to other base layer protocols today?
Of course, so Tezos is a piece of software. That's the most important thing to understand. It's an open source piece of software that powers a network, the Tezos network. And in that network, what people do is they create a ledger using a blockchain. And on that ledger, they can create assets, transfer assets, create smart contracts. So it's, generally speaking, a smart contract platform. What makes it, I think, unique is it's controlled by its users, by its participants. There's no roadmap set by developers. What happens on the network is what is decided by the validators of the network. So it has a governance model where people can vote on upgrades. And as a result, it's also a very dynamic protocol. It's a protocol that has upgraded around 12 times, I think. By now, we're about to have proposal for M. So M is a 13th letter. So yes, 12 upgrades. And that's been a journey that started in 2014 for the creation of the first idea, then the first papers, and launched in 2018. And since then, Tezos has been a pioneer of proof of stake, has been a pioneer of smart contract safety, and is now becoming, I would say, a pioneer in scaling.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's one of the things that makes Tezos unique, right? Is the ability to have this like forkless upgradability, and this self-amending functionality, which allows the network to continually evolve. And that was built into the network from the beginning, which kind of avoids all that technical debt and some of the stresses you see in other networks. So appreciate the overview, Arthur. Let's move down here to the financial section, okay? So what we're looking at here is the financial overview of the Tezos network. Feel free to check out the report if you want to dive into it. Let's jump here to the XTZ token. So Arthur, if you don't mind, could you please provide an overview of what Tez or XTZ is, its role in the network? And here we're looking at some supply and demand metrics, some minting and burning. So if you could just talk about Tez XTZ, please.
Yes. So Tez is a token. XTZ is a ticker you might want to use if you have an accounting software. Tez is a cryptocurrency that underpins the Tezos network. Or another way to look at it is the Tezos network uses to support Tez as a cryptocurrency. It's a classical cryptocurrency, so with the usual features, payments, store of value, but it can also be used to pay for transactions on the Tezos network and storage of data. And that is being used in particular for smart contract applications. It's also the economic incentives for decentralized validation of the network. So it's a proof of stake system. So people can take some stake it, become bakers, and create blocks. There's a hybrid system for the proof of stake system in Tezos, which is that in order to create blocks, you need to stake, but in order to get the right to create a block, you don't. So anyone who holds Tez can get the right to create a block, but then that right is oftentimes delegated to someone who has actually put up a stake, which we call bakers. So that's been known as a liquid proof of stake model, which combines both some sort of Sybil resistance and also economic incentives for the security of the network.
Got it. Okay, so that's the main things. And Tez has a 4.5% on average annualized inflation rate with no maximum supply, correct?
Yeah, that's right. But I don't like to think of it so much as inflation. It is inflation in the sense that there's more tokens being created every year, but the reward you get from the blocks which are being created are today above 4.5% because not everyone is delegating, not everyone is exercising their rights to create blocks, And as a result, the net effect, which would be the typical reward you get from baking minus inflation, is actually means that on the net it's actually deflationary.
Got it. Yeah, it's a net positive for the stakers. Got it. Yeah, and then real quick, moving back up to this financial overview table here. So there's about 932 million XTZ in circulation at the end of Q3. We're looking at about a 1% new amount of tokens come into circulation per quarter.
Yeah.
So let's jump down here to the network overview section. So let's look at the Tezos account activity, okay? So it's been dropping a little bit, but I think this is what you're seeing across the general crypto markets, right? It's a bear market. All things, FTX related did not really help. So can you talk about accounts on Tezos, right? I know the majority of the activity is happening in NFTs, and we'll get to that. But there's been some slowdown. Any idea why?
It's slowed down, but it's still going up. So, when you look at this is the number of new accounts are still being created, and there's a lot of new users joining the Tezos chain. For the slowdown, I think, like you said, we're in a bear market. There's a lot less interest out there for cryptocurrency projects. So fewer people are looking at it than before. But they are, there's still growth in the Tezos ecosystem today. The other thing that I find quite interesting is that a lot of the activity that we have has been extremely resilient to the bear market, because predominantly, I would say, a lot of smart contract activity and account creation activity has been related to art marketplaces on Tezos. And, these are in the art business, they're not in the crypto business. And so as a result, they're not, that directly affected by the winter.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I have some language in here, right? So when creating an account, there's like a small one-time fee, right? Which is helpful in reducing some of the clutter and some of the noise that you'll see in these other ecosystems where people will just create new accounts to inflate the numbers. So that kind of disincentivizes that creation.
Yeah.
And then like you said, like if someone, acquires an NFT for the first time, but didn't create an account because they're interested in the art, that may not appear. So although, it's somewhat going down here, it's not necessarily fully encompassing of everything that's happening.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah. And then, total cleared accounts also dropped, which is a net positive there as well. Let's keep it going here.
So cleared account is when someone just empties their account, so the account is deleted.
Correct. Yeah. When someone's just emptying their account. So let's hear to network activity. Okay. So what we're looking at here is smart contract calls and transactions. So the way Tezos calculates network activity is looking at both smart contract calls and transactions. And despite the account metrics somewhat slowing down, these metrics have actually held up fairly well and are actually increasing in some cases. So can you talk about the network activity, Arthur?
Yeah, absolutely. So network activity is like you mentioned, like smart contract calls, I think, is an interesting one to measure, because not that there's no legitimate cases for doing transactions. I think like payments are quite important, but transactions can be dominated by transactions to and from exchanges. So by focusing on smart contract calls, you have a better idea of actual usage of the network. And yes, like you mentioned, it's held up fairly well. And part of it is because a lot of the use cases on the Tezos network are not really driven by speculation, and as a result are less sensitive to hypes and manias and despair.
Got it. Okay, yeah, and then let's talk a little bit here. I got a paragraph here. We talk about the transaction optimistic rollups, the TORUs. Okay, so could you explain that? I know not necessarily too much has been going on with that, but that's kind of a precursor to what's to come with the SCORUs, the smart contract optimistic rollups, which are scheduled to come out, if not in the L upgrade, in the M upgrade. So could you talk about the TORUs and then kind of highlight what to expect with the SCORUs?
Yes, so the TORUs was one experiment to do high throughput rollups focused specifically on transactions and nothing else. And it was really a learning experience for a lot of the core developers working on Tezos, and a stepstone to smart rollups. They've been called SCORUs in the past, and I think now they want to rename them to smart rollups, which is better than SCORU as a name, I think. Mm-hmm. So the smart rollups are coming in M, which will be proposed, I think, sometimes in January. And so, not much activity with TORUs, I think, because largely the blocks are still not full on Tezos, so there's not a pressing need for extra throughput. On the other hand, I think what Score do is that they don't just increase the throughput a bit; they increase it massively, and so I think that opens for new type of applications. So it's not just, hey, let's get a little more space in our blocks, or even a lot more space in our blocks. It's let's get so much throughput that the type of application that you might even consider building is itself different.
Got it. And is the idea still to introduce WebAssembly as the initial execution environment?
That's absolutely right. Yes. So
Awesome.
it means that any application you can write in Wasm can run as a smart rollup on a Tezos chain. So you could take a Polkadot parachain written in Wasm, for example, and run that as a rollup on a Tezos chain.
Got it. Okay, yeah, so we can expect Wasm to be the first execution environment on the upcoming smart contract optimistic rollups.
Yes.
So that's a high-level look at the Tezos network, okay? Let's dive in a little more into the Tezos ecosystem and then the developer side of things, okay? So this section, this ecosystem and dev overview section you can think of it as like a subsection of the section we just saw. So how are all of those high-level numbers being made? Okay. And as we mentioned, NFTs have been the predominant driver of activity on the Tezos network. And as we can see here, despite the bear and despite everything happening, Tezos NFT volume has continued to rise. Okay, when denominated in Tez or XTZ.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you kind of talk about the resiliency of the NFT ecosystem on Tezos?
I think it's because it's driven by. I think a lot of our applications are driven by fundamentals. There's fundamentally people are going to keep creating digital art. Digital life is everywhere today. It would be silly to imagine that it's going to disappear as a medium. And the alternative right now for collecting digital art is that it's either going to be on a blockchain or it's going to be on the corporate database. I don't think the latter makes more sense, which leaves the former, and there are not many blockchains out there which are decentralized, have an ethos of decentralization, cheap fees, and so Tezos has become the place to be for artists and collectors, and that's not something that's very sensitive to all the Sierra Capital or FTX seediness.
Yeah, totally. It's been very resilient. It's encouraging to see. So let's jump down. Go ahead.
It feels terrible in the bull market where everything is frosty, but when you're in the bear markets, the fact that the applications are resilient are very.
It's almost more encouraging to see some levels of growth in a bear versus higher levels of growth in a bull. So jumping down here, so where is this NFT activity place happening? Right, it's happening on these NFT marketplaces. The largest of which is Object or OBJKT, if you want to pronounce that for me. So can you kind of
like an object, but it's OBJKT.
OBJKT, yeah. So and then I got here a little note within the chart that 75% of activity is happening in the top 4 marketplaces. So you can see those here on the right legend. So can you kind of talk us through the top marketplaces, right? What makes them unique? What makes them different? How have they been able to attract users?
I mean, Object.com, I think, is a generic marketplace. Like any NFT on the Tezos network, you're going to find on Object.com. And it has the benefit of being extremely good UX. Like, it's really a pleasure to use. The features are great. If you've been used to OpenSea, I recommend trying Object.com to see what an actual NFT marketplace can be like. It is a lot better. FX Hash is a more specialized marketplace. They are specifically focused on the generative art that is created through the FX Hash platform. And then we have also Taya and Hikednung, for example, Hikednung represents, I would say, mostly the old NFT smart contracts, which are used by the Hikednung platform. But a lot of the Hikednung activity is actually happening in terms of front end on Taya or on Object.com or these other platforms.
Awesome. Yeah. So those are some of the leading NFT marketplaces on Tezos. So let's jump down here. So let's go back into that NFT volume, right? So I've got here on this visual, you've got the NFT sales volume has continued to increase. And if we look at it on a year-over-year basis, it's up 42% versus the peak of the 2021 bull market, which is, very impressive. but active traders have been somewhat going down. So what I think of when I see this, right, is that the users who are on the network are really, they're doing a lot of activity, but the quantity of people have gone down. So is that an accurate observation? Is that kind of what you're seeing from your side of things?
Yeah, I think having an absolute smaller number of very active users has been a characteristic of most blockchain applications. Not just on the Tezos ecosystem, but broadly. And part of it, I would say, is because of the way applications today are designed, and because of limits to scaling that we're seeing. Most software out there today that's not an application on the blockchain has far more users, but also far less value per users in terms of activity.
Yeah, great point. That is kind of the general theme you see across all networks. And then, look, I've got here highlighted for the viewers that, there are some major notable partnerships, right? I mean, we've got Man U, we've got Oracle, Red Bull, McLaren, Gap, Ubisoft, and these are just to name a few. So, these are some big name partnerships with some legacy brands that are choosing to work with Tezos. So that's encouraging as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's drop down here. So there's also, a DeFi component to the Tezos ecosystem, right?
Absolutely,
and the DeFi component is obviously not as large as the NFT component, and relative to competitors, it's small. But nonetheless, it's a part of the ecosystem, and it's something that I believe you guys are focusing on. So can you talk to me about the Tezos DeFi ecosystem, right? What are some of the leading protocols? What is the plan to continue growing this part of the ecosystem? Anything encouraging?
Yeah. So the first is to address the biggest piece of that pie, liquidity baking. That's actually part of it's part of the Tezos protocol. So part of the Tezos protocol, a small fraction, very very small fraction of every block goes to subsidize a pool between a wrapped version of Bitcoin and Tez, and it's the experiment at the protocol level to have some inflation funding around liquidity. That is quite interesting. In terms of the DeFi protocols themselves, Use is an interesting one. They have synthetic assets, so they create a synthetic version of USD, and they're also used as a lending platform, and they have a few other products, swaps and such. Plenty DeFi, also similar. They have pools, they have farms, and different type of DeFi primitives, and really good. I think they put a lot of work in having stellar UX. It's worth trying out. Q2Swap is probably one of the oldest swap platform on Tezos, so they've had a lot of experience building it, and it's one of the most used. We're also seeing protocols coming, such as 3 routes that are DEX aggregators, so that you don't necessarily have to know all of these different DeFi protocols on Tezos and can use them directly. Colibri is stablecoin. So we have all of this ecosystem in DeFi, which has been, smaller, like you said, like on many other platforms, but very resilient and growing.
Yeah, totally. Okay, awesome. Thanks for that detailed overview of what's happening in the ecosystem, in the DeFi ecosystem, excuse me. All right, last thing on the ecosystem and dev section, right? So now let's look at the devs. So it's difficult to measure developer activity, but a more accurate metric, right, is the deployment of smart contracts. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that Tezos developer activity has increased, right, as new, by the release of new smart contracts, essentially. So that it actually set an all-time high in Q3. So can you talk about how Tezos developer ecosystem is going, the release of new smart contracts? I'm sure the WASM upgrade is going to be really important, right, into bringing in new devs. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think smart rollups are going to bring a lot of developers. I'm not sure what caused the spike. I would say that probably around March of 2022, there was a conscious decision among all of entities working in a Tezos ecosystem to try to turn a lot of, I would say, marketing and adoption work towards developers. So there's been a big push in terms of hackathon, hacker houses, developer outreach, and that maybe those fruits may be bearing in the numbers that we see today.
Yeah, awesome. And it's got to be one of the more encouraging things, right? I mean, it's such a nascent industry, right? Dev activity is one of the best leading indicators of things to come. So let's jump down here. So now let's start looking at the decentralization and staking of the network. Okay. So Tezos has, at the end of Q3, 417 active validators, about 112 million in XTZ staked. You can see some of the numbers here in detail. 75% of the total supply staked, which is actually relatively high versus other ecosystems. And then Nakamoto of 5. So can you walk us through, how does the validator process work? Where are these validators located? How does it work to stake? I know we touched on it earlier, but if we can touch on it again.
So one thing to understand is that there's staking and staking, right, on the Tezos network. In many proof of stake system, the concept is that you stake some coins and then you receive the rights to create blocks, and then you create those blocks. That's how most staking works. It's not how staking works on Tezos. In Tezos, you own some coins and then you receive the right to create blocks. And then if you want to actually exercise that right to create a block, you need to stake. You need to stake something. So the 75% figures is the people who are actually making use of that right to create blocks, either directly or by delegating it to someone who actually puts a stake. The benefit of that is that you don't want to have too much that's staked on a network, because otherwise you need to pay a high interest rate, right, for everyone to be staked. You would need to have a lot of inflation to justify that, so that would be expensive. But on the other hand, you don't want to have too small of a group of people who receive the right to create blocks, because you lose some CBL resistance properties. So the way this is done in a Tezos network is to say everyone who owns a token receives the right to create a block, but then the economic security is kind of decoupled from that. So that's the innovation in liquid proof of stake, and I think it's why the Tezos chain has managed to stay relatively decentralized in terms of validators.
Got it. Okay, yeah, thanks for walking us through the process here. So let's just kind of look into the visuals, right, so we can get a better understanding. So validator activity, right, measured by the number of validators and the active validator stake, has been very consistent. And then I've got here in the subheader that the Ithaca upgrade introduced multiple validator improvements.
Yeah. I mean, every upgrade, I think there's an attempt to make life easier for validators.
Got it. Yeah, and then here I got in the notes that, validators were present in 40 countries, right, with the US, Switzerland, and France having the largest presences. And that's also valuable, right, and important because, should something go wrong, the level of decentralization across the globe is important to keeping the network.
Of course, like geopolitical decentralization is crucial.
Yeah, totally. And then, here, I've got another note that the minimum requirement to run a validator used to be 8,000 Tez, right? And now it is 6,000. So that's also helped in increasing the validator.
I think it's something like that. But to be honest, like if I look at the amount of money that is 6,000, to release the requirement is like you need to have a machine, and you need to be willing to run the validator. That's probably today the bigger.
The technical side of it.
Yeah. And I think this number is going to keep coming down as well.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Good to know. All right. And then on the flip side of that, right? The delegator count in the stake has continued to increase, which is encouraging, right? I mean, generally when people stake, they are long-term bullish on the network. And as you can see here, we've had a 9% on average quarter-over-quarter increase in the number of active delegators, and then a roughly 2% increase in the delegator stake. So that's another encouraging metric. And then finally, we touch on it again. The percentage of total supplied stake has been relatively consistent, but very high. And then of that total stake, right, 80% is coming from delegators, and the remaining 20% from validators.
Yeah. I'm surprised by this graph, actually. I would have thought over time it would climb higher than this. But it's the reason it's the reason, by the way, that Tezos is actually like on a net deflationary is because this number is not 100%.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So that's it for the quantitative side of things. Let's talk to the qualitative side of things. So we mentioned earlier that Tezos has this self-amending functionality where it can implement these forkless on-chain upgrades. Okay. In September, the Kathmandu upgrade, which was, I believe, the 11th protocol upgrade, took place. And that one, as you can see mentioned here, had some pipeline block validation and some other improvements to the network. So Arthur, if you don't mind, could you talk about some of the recent upgrades and some of the importance to it? Tenderbake may be one worth mentioning, and then what
Yeah.
to expect moving forward. Right, we got the L upgrade, which I think was supposed to introduce smart contract rollups, but is no longer. I think that was pushed to the M upgrade. So can we talk about some of the previous ones and then look forward to the future ones?
Absolutely. All right. So I'll go very briefly. Ithaca Tenderbake, big improvement on the consensus algorithm, and it will pave the way for a reduction in latency. Jakarta, there was a first foray into rollups with the transaction optimistic rollups and a bunch of other improvements. Kathmandu, which is the current version of the protocol. So that one has pipeline block validation. So pipeline block validation, it's quite a technical topic, but essentially it's tied to latency reduction and improving the peer-to-peer network. So we can propagate block by checking that they're valid without actually applying the block and trying to compute the outcome of transactions. Verifiable delay function, that's a really cool piece of cryptography. So it improves the randomness on Tezos. Tezos has been using game theoretical type of randomness generation in the past. I think we were the first to launch with something like this. And now we have verifiable delay function. So they're a trick in cryptography to produce random numbers in a verifiable manner. Events in smart contracts, that's a feature that had been required, they've been asked for by developers for a long time. And Lima, so Lima has just been approved just like a few days ago. It passed the final vote and is going to activate in about 2 weeks. So Lima did not include smart contract optimistic rollup, but it includes more pipelining, and a lot of improvements for bakers. So in particular, they'll be able to use a different key for creating blocks and for spending the fund on their account, which will help them rotate keys. And so the M upgrade, which is will be proposed after the activation of Lima, so probably early next year, is going to include smart contract optimistic rollup in WASM. So that's a big deal, and really looking forward to that one. And we're staying in the mountain between Kathmandu and Lima, high altitude.
Totally. I know the whole Tezos community is looking forward to the smart contract rollups coming online. So speaking of those, here's a little comparison of it, right? So today, the transaction rollups are live, right? And, as we mentioned, they're purposely simplistic, right? They're kind of used as to help the network adjust. The smart contract rollups will be a huge upgrade to the network, right? Bringing, significant amounts of new functionality. And you can see here on this table what some of those upgrades are going to be.
Yeah. First, I said something stupid. Lima is actually by sea level. It's not in the Andes like I somehow imagined. So just scratch that. We're not staying in the mountain. We're climbing down the mountain to Lima. All right, transaction optimistic rollups, smart rollups. So transaction optimistic rollup do just transactions. They're a simplified version of rollups. If you need to have a lot of transactions, maybe like trading applications, they work fine. If you want to do something more general, you'll want to use a smart rollups. And I think the tools will end up being deprecated. They had a sunset baked into them from the beginning. So they'll end up being deprecated for the smart rollups, which are very, very general.
Got it. Okay, yeah, so that's kind of the trend, the difference there. And then, I kind of skipped over it, but when we started at the start of 2022, Nomadic Labs, right, which is a core contributor who has a fantastic blog I like to reference often, announced that 2022 is the year of scaling Tezos, and undoubtedly Tezos has followed that, right? I mean, we've had Ithaca, Jakarta, Kathmandu. I think Lima's going to be, go live by the end of 2022. So what is that? 4 upgrades in 1 year. I mean, that's impressive for a network. All right, so here we are at the closing summary. So, I think we've talked through everything, Arthur, right? We talked about the, kind of the finances of the network and the Tez token. We talked about how the network has been resilient despite the bear market. And a lot of that resiliency is being driven by the NFT sector. We talked about how staking has actually increased, right? Which is a sign of bullish participants in the network. And then, we just talked about some of the scaling of the network. So is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up? Anything to look forward to? Anything that's catching your attention?
Absolutely. So, you said that Nomadic Lab had said that 2022 was the year of scaling for Tezos. That scaling is finally shipping in M. So that's tremendously exciting. So what is 2023 going to be about? And I want to say it's going to be about user experience and developer experience in particular. So that includes improvements in latency, for instance, but also in tooling and in development environments.
Awesome. You heard it here first, Tezos community. You can look to some nice improvements in 2023 and continued scaling of the network. All right, Arthur, I thought this was fantastic. Again, thanks for taking part in the second Tezos Messari analyst call. We'll hold another one of these after Q4. Where we'll talk about the L upgrade and any other things happening in the ecosystem. To the Tezos community, thanks for tuning in. Check out the Q4 Tezos report when it comes out.